Pay rent or get out, you old hag. Ashley's voice cut through my birthday dinner like a knife through my last hope. My son David just sat there, fork frozen halfway to his mouth, watching his wife humiliate the woman who gave him life. So I stood up, wiped my mouth with the napkin I'd embroidered for their first anniversary, and walked out without a word. By morning, the for sale sign was already in the yard of the house they thought they owned. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how a 70-year-old woman learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply giving people exactly what they ask for, with interest. It started 3 hours earlier when Ashley had insisted we needed to have a serious family discussion over my birthday dinner. Nothing good ever came from Ashley's serious discussions, trust me. In my 68 years, I'd learned to read the warning signs, and my daughter-in-law had been flashing them like a broken traffic light for weeks. "Margaret," she began, using my full name instead of the mom she'd called me for the past 15 years. Another red flag. "David and I have been talking, and we think it's time for some changes around here." I set down my fork and looked at my son, waiting for him to jump in with clarification or reassurance. Instead, he studied his mashed potatoes like they held the secrets of the universe. Coward. "What kind of changes?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Ashley had been circling this conversation for months, dropping hints about space and independence and how multi-generational living isn't for everyone. Well, Ashley smiled, that sharp little smile I'd learned meant trouble. "We've been carrying all the household expenses while you've been living here rent-free for almost a year. It's not really fair to us or the kids." Rent-free. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. I'd been living in this house since my husband Frank died 13 months ago, yes, but rent-free? I glanced around the dining room I'd painted last spring, at the new curtains I'd sewn for the windows, at the garden visible through the glass doors that I'd planted and tended every single day since moving in. "I've been contributing," I said carefully. "Groceries, utilities, the new roof repair last month." "That's not the same as paying rent," Ashley shot back. "And frankly, having you here is affecting our marriage. David and I need our space, our privacy. Our privacy. Because apparently my quiet presence in the guest bedroom was somehow interfering with their ability to live their lives in the other 5 bedrooms of this house." "How much rent did you have in mind?" I asked, buying time while my mind raced. Ashley and David exchanged a look. They'd rehearsed this. $1,500 a month, Ashley said, plus your share of utilities and household expenses. Call it $2,000 total. $2,000. From a woman whose only income was Social Security. They might as well have asked me to fly to the moon. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. Ashley had maxed out 3 credit cards on designer clothes and spa treatments over the past year, and when she'd hinted about temporary financial help last Christmas, I'd suggested she create a budget instead of writing her a check. Now she was demanding I pay rent I couldn't afford in my own house. "And if I can't afford that?" I asked quietly. "Then you'll need to find somewhere you can afford," Ashley said, her voice getting sharper. "David and I aren't running a charity here. We have our own children to think about, our own future to secure." I looked again at my son, desperately hoping he'd finally speak up, maybe suggest a compromise or a more reasonable timeline. Instead, he nodded along with his wife's words like a bobblehead on a dashboard. That's when Ashley delivered the final blow, the words that changed everything. "Pay rent or get out, you old hag." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Ashley looked shocked by what had come out of her mouth, but not shocked enough to take it back, not shocked enough to apologize. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting through what I now realized had been a carefully orchestrated ambush. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate, the birthday cake Ashley had grudgingly bought from the grocery store still sitting untouched in its plastic container. "I understand," I said quietly. And I did understand. I understood that I'd been living in a fool's paradise, believing that family meant something to these people. I understood that Ashley saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. And I understood that my son, the boy I'd raised to stand up for what's right, had chosen his wife's cruelty over his mother's dignity. I walked to my room, past the family photos lining the hallway, pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, graduations and family vacations. All of it had been a lie, Or maybe it had been real once, and Ashley had slowly poisoned it until nothing genuine remained. In my bedroom, I pulled out the one box I'd never fully unpacked. The important papers I'd kept separate, just in case. Birth certificates, insurance policies, and at the bottom, a manila folder I hadn't opened in over a year. The deed to the house. You see, this house had been Frank's dream. He'd bought it 28 years ago as a surprise for our 40th wedding anniversary, planning to give it to David when we were ready to downsize. But Frank had been smart about the paperwork. The deed was in both our names, with full rights of survivorship. When Frank died, the house became mine. Completely, legally, undeniably mine. David knew this, of course. He'd been present when the lawyer read the will, had seen all the paperwork during probate. But somehow, in the months since Frank's death, we'd all fallen into the comfortable fiction that this was David and Ashley's house, and I was just a temporary guest. Well, temporary was about to get a whole new meaning. I called my real estate agent at 8 o'clock that evening, even though it was late on a Friday. Sarah Chen had been selling houses in our neighborhood for 20 years, and she owed me a favor from when I'd referred my neighbor Mrs. Patterson to her last spring. "Sarah, it's Margaret Williams. I need to sell my house. Fast." "Oh, Margaret, I'm sorry to hear that." "Too. Is everything okay?" "Everything's about to be perfect. How quickly can we get this on the market?" "Well, if you're serious about a quick sale, I can have a photographer out tomorrow morning. We could list it by Sunday, maybe have showings by next week." "What about cash buyers? I seem to remember you mentioning some investors who buy houses quickly." "There are a few. The offers won't be full market value, but if you need speed..." Sarah's voice trailed off, sensing there was more to this story. "Speed is exactly what I need. Can you make some calls tonight?" By the time I hung up the phone, I felt lighter than I had in months. Ashley wanted me gone? Fine. She'd get exactly what she asked for. With all the consequences she was too short-sighted to consider. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was anticipation. Saturday morning, while David took the kids to soccer practice and Ashley went to her yoga class, 3 different cash buyers toured the house with Sarah. By Saturday afternoon, I had 2 offers. By Saturday evening, I'd accepted one. The sale price was $70,000 below market value, but the buyer could close in 3 days and wanted to take possession immediately. Done. I spent Saturday night packing my few belongings and making arrangements for a lovely assisted living apartment across town. The kind with a pool and organized activities and 0 tolerance for ungrateful family members. Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear. Perfect weather for new beginnings. Ashley was in the kitchen making her usual Sunday brunch when the doorbell rang. She looked at me expectantly, as if I should answer it. But why should I? It wasn't my house anymore. "Aren't you going to get that?" she asked when the bell rang again. "It's not my house," I said pleasantly, sipping my coffee. "I'm just a guest here, remember?" The bell rang a 3rd time, longer and more insistent. Ashley huffed and marched to the front door, her yoga pants swishing with annoyance. I heard voices, confusion, Ashley's tone shifting from irritation to uncertainty. Then her voice getting louder, saying things like, "I don't understand," and "there must be some mistake." And finally, "David, get in here right now." But David was still upstairs getting dressed, and the voices at the door were getting more official sounding, professional, legal. I finished my coffee and rinsed my cup, placing it in the dishwasher I'd loaded faithfully every morning for the past year. Such a helpful house guest I'd been. Ashley burst back into the kitchen, her face pale, clutching a stack of official-looking papers. "What did you do?" she whispered. I smiled at her, the kind of peaceful smile that comes from finally taking control of your own life. "I gave you exactly what you wanted," I said. "Your space, your privacy, and your independence from the old hag who was such a burden." The papers in Ashley's hands were trembling now. Behind her, I could hear David's footsteps on the stairs, his voice calling out to ask what was happening. But that's a story for tomorrow, because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't a dish served cold. It's watching people realize they've been playing a game where they never knew the rules. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, still buttoning his shirt, looking between Ashley's pale face and my serene smile with growing confusion. "What's going on? Who was at the door?" Ashley thrust the papers at him like they were on fire. Read it. I watched my son's face change as he scanned the documents. Confusion shifted to disbelief, then to something that looked almost like respect before settling into panic. Notice of ownership transfer? He read aloud. Mandatory vacate by... His voice caught. Tuesday? This Tuesday? That's 3 days, Ashley said, her voice climbing toward hysteria. They want us out in 3 days. With the kids, with all our stuff. This has to be illegal. David looked up at me, and for the first time in months, I saw my son instead of Ashley's husband. Mom, what did you do? I solved your space problem, I said calmly, refilling my coffee cup. The regular Sunday morning routine felt surreal given the chaos erupting around me, but I was determined to enjoy my last breakfast in this kitchen. You wanted me to pay rent or get out. Since I couldn't afford rent, I got out. Problem solved. But you can't just... Ashley sputtered. This is our house. Actually, it wasn't. I opened the folder I'd placed on the counter and slid a copy of the deed across to them. This house belonged to me. Frank left it to me in his will. You've been my guests for the past year, not the other way around. The silence that followed was broken only by the coffee maker's final gurgle and the sound of our neighbors starting their lawnmower next door. Normal Sunday morning sounds for everyone, except the 3 adults standing in this kitchen, staring at each other across a chasm that had just opened up between past and future. David was the first to speak. I knew the house was yours legally, but you thought I'd just quietly hand it over when you decided I was inconvenient, I finished gently. And maybe I would have, if you'd asked nicely, if you'd included me in the decision, if you'd treated me like family instead of like a burden. Ashley grabbed the deed from David's hands, studying it like she could make the words change by staring hard enough. There has to be something we can do, some legal recourse. You can't just throw your own family out on the street. I'm not throwing anyone anywhere, I corrected. I sold my house to buyers who want to move in quickly. They've offered to let you stay through Tuesday to pack your belongings. That's actually quite generous of them. Generous? Ashley's voice cracked. Margaret, we have children. We have jobs. We can't just find a new place to live in 3 days. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then I remembered her words from the night before. Pay rent or get out, you old hag. You're both intelligent, capable adults, I said. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Maybe your parents can help. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was overwhelmed. Mom, please, can't we work something out? Maybe postpone the sale? Talk to the buyers? The sale is final. I signed the papers yesterday. I pulled out another document. Here's your copy of the closing statement. As you can see, I got a very fair price considering the quick turnaround. Ashley leaned over David's shoulder to read the figure, and I watched her face change again, this time to something that looked like greed. $600,000, she breathed. For this house? It's a good neighborhood, I said mildly. Frank chose well. I could practically see the calculations running through Ashley's head. David's inheritance, which she'd been counting on for years, had just been converted to cash in my bank account. Mom, David said carefully, what are you planning to do with the money? There it was, the question Ashley had been dying to ask but was too smart to voice directly. Well, I said, settling into my chair with my coffee. I've put a deposit on a lovely apartment at Sunshine Manor. It's a senior living community with all meals included, transportation to shopping and medical appointments, organized activities. They even have a pool. Sunshine Manor, Ashley repeated faintly. That place costs $4,000 a month. $4,200, actually. But it includes everything. No need to burden family with requests for help or contributions. I smiled at her over my coffee cup. Complete independence, just like you wanted. David sat down heavily at the table. Mom, I never meant for things to go this far. When Ashley said we needed to discuss living arrangements, I thought maybe we could work out something fair for everyone. What would have been fair, David? I asked gently. Charging your recently widowed mother market rate rent to live in the house her husband left her? Finding creative ways to push me out so you could have the space to yourselves? We weren't trying to push you out, he protested. But his voice lacked conviction. No? Then what would you call demanding $2,000 a month from someone whose Social Security barely covers $1,000? What would you call your wife's charming nickname for me? Ashley flinched. I didn't mean that. I was angry. I said things I shouldn't have. You meant every word, I said calmly. And that's fine. Now you get to live with the consequences. My phone rang, a welcome interruption to the increasingly tense conversation. Sarah, how did the walkthrough go? Perfect. My real estate agent's voice was bright and professional. The buyers are thrilled with the condition of the house. They wanted me to tell you again how much they appreciate your flexibility with the timeline. Wonderful. And the moving truck I requested? Scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. They'll have you completely moved to Sunshine Manor by afternoon. Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. I hung up to find David and Ashley staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You hired movers? David asked weakly. Of course. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. Did you think I was going to load boxes by myself at my age? I stood up and rinsed my coffee cup. I'll be out of your way by tomorrow afternoon. The new owners said you could use the guest room until Tuesday if needed. The guest room, Ashley repeated hollowly. You mean our bedroom? Well, it was the master bedroom when it was my house. I suppose it's whatever the new owners want it to be now. I headed toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Ashley? You might want to start packing. The new owners mentioned they have a very strict timeline. And I'd hate for your belongings to get accidentally donated to charity if they're still here Wednesday morning. As I walked toward my room to continue packing, I heard Ashley's voice behind me, high and desperate. David, do something. Call a lawyer. This can't be legal. But I knew David wouldn't call a lawyer. Because David knew his mother better than his wife did, and he was finally realizing that the sweet, accommodating woman who'd raised him had a spine made of steel when pushed too far. Besides, everything I'd done was perfectly legal. I'd sold my own house to buyers who'd made a legitimate offer. The fact that my son and daughter-in-law had been living there under false assumptions wasn't my problem. It was amazing how much clarity came from finally owning your own power. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, I was sure. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was going to sleep peacefully in my own house, knowing that I'd never again have to beg for a place at a table that should have been mine by right. And if that made me a terrible mother, well, maybe Ashley could explain to the grandchildren why Grandma Margaret wasn't welcome at family dinners anymore. Somehow I didn't think she'd find the courage. Monday morning arrived with the mechanical precision of a Swiss watch and the subtlety of a tornado. The moving truck pulled into the driveway at exactly 9 a.m., just as Ashley was attempting to load her car with what looked like half their belongings. "Excuse me, ma'am," the lead mover called out to her. "We need access to the driveway." Ashley straightened up from her car trunk, her hair escaping from what had once been a neat ponytail. "You can't park there. We're trying to move out." "Yes, ma'am, we understand. We're here to help Mrs. Williams move out too. Won't take but a few hours." I watched this exchange from my bedroom window while folding the last of my sweaters into a suitcase. 3 men in uniform shirts were already unloading dollies and moving blankets, the tools of professional displacement. Ashley marched up to my room, not bothering to knock. "You could have warned us about the movers." "I thought David told you yesterday." I closed my suitcase with a satisfying zip. "Weren't you listening during our conversation?" "I was in shock." Ashley's voice cracked. "Normal people don't just sell their houses without warning their families." "Normal families don't call their mothers-in-law old hags either," I replied calmly. "I guess we're both learning new things about normal." The sounds of professional moving drifted up from downstairs. Men calling out measurements, the scrape of furniture across hardwood floors, the rustle of packing paper. Soon, this house would be stripped of everything that made it mine, everything that connected it to Frank and our 43 years of marriage. But instead of sadness, I felt something unexpected. Liberation. Ashley was still standing in my doorway, looking lost. "Margaret, please, can't we talk about this like adults? Maybe work out some kind of arrangement with the new owners?" "What kind of arrangement did you have in mind?" I asked, genuinely curious. "The same kind where I pay market rent to live in my own house." "That's not—" "I didn't realize it was technically your house." "Technically?" I turned to face her fully. "Ashley, what exactly did you think was happening here? Did you think Frank just gave David a house and forgot to tell anyone?" Her silence was answer enough. You thought David inherited the house when Frank died, I continued. You thought I was just some old woman taking up space in what you believed was your home. David never corrected me, she said defensively. No, he didn't, which makes me wonder what other conversations you two have had about my future without bothering to include me. Ashley's face flushed red. We were trying to take care of you. By charging me rent I couldn't afford? By making me feel unwelcome in my own home? By calling me an old hag when I couldn't meet your financial demands? I shook my head. Ashley, that's not taking care of someone. That's managing them out of your life. Mrs. Williams? One of the movers appeared in the doorway. We're ready for the bedroom furniture whenever you are. Perfect timing, I said, picking up my suitcase. Ashley, you'll want to get your things out of the master bathroom. They'll need to move the dresser shortly. I walked downstairs to find David sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. Around him, the systematic dismantling of my old life continued with professional efficiency. Mom, he said without looking up, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. Oh? About working things out, finding something fair for everyone. He finally raised his eyes to meet mine. What if we could make this work? What if Ashley and I paid you rent for the house, real rent, and we all just started over? I sat down across from him, watching the movers wrap my dining room chairs in thick blankets. David, the house is sold, the papers are signed, the new owners have already transferred the down payment. But there has to be some kind of cooling off period, right? Some way to cancel the sale? Why would I want to cancel the sale? The question seemed to genuinely confuse him. Because this is your home. Because we're your family. Because, he gestured helplessly at the chaos around us. Because this isn't how families are supposed to treat each other. Isn't it? I asked quietly. Is this really so different from how you and Ashley have been treating me? We never threw you out of your house. No, you just made it clear I wasn't welcome in it. I watched one of the movers carefully lift the framed photograph from Frank's military service, the one that had sat on our mantel for 20 years. Tell me, David, when was the last time you asked my opinion about anything that affected my life? We ask your opinion all the time. About babysitting schedules and what to cook for dinner, yes. But when did you ask my opinion about how long I wanted to live here? About what kind of living arrangements would make me comfortable? About whether I felt welcome in this house? David was quiet for a long moment. We assumed you'd tell us if you were unhappy. I was telling you. Every day. You just weren't listening. Mrs. Williams? Another mover appeared, this one holding a clipboard. We've got everything loaded except for a few boxes in the garage. Your son says those belong to him? Yes, those can stay. I turned back to David. I've left a few things in the garage for you. Photo albums, some of your father's tools, boxes of your childhood things I've been saving. The new owners said they could stay temporarily if you want to come back for them later. Something in David's expression shifted. You saved my childhood things? Of course I did. They're in clearly labeled boxes. I thought someday you might want to show them to your own children. He was quiet for another moment. I remember helping Dad build that workbench in the garage. I must have been 12, 13. It was your birthday present that year. He said every man needs to know how to work with his hands. And you kept all his tools? They're yours now. Frank would have wanted that. For a moment, David looked like the boy I'd raised. The one who used to sit in that garage for hours, watching his father work and asking endless questions about everything. Before Ashley, before adult responsibilities, before he'd learned to see his mother as a burden instead of a person. Mom, I'm sorry, he said suddenly. I'm sorry we made you feel unwelcome. I'm sorry about what Ashley said. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you. I know you are. And I did know. I could see it in his face, the genuine regret. But David, being sorry doesn't fix what's broken. It could be a start. I stood up as the movers carried the last of my furniture toward the door. Maybe, but not here. Not in this house. Too much has been said. Too much has been broken. We all need space to figure out who we are without all these old expectations. So what happens now? I looked around the kitchen one last time. Ashley had chosen the paint color, picked out the backsplash, arranged the cabinets according to her sense of style. Nothing in this room reflected my taste or my needs. I'd been a guest in my own home for longer than I'd realized. Now I go live my life, I said simply. I make new routines, new friends, new memories. and you and Ashley figure out how to manage your household without my contributions. Our contributions, David corrected. You contributed a lot more than we acknowledged. Yes, I did. I picked up my purse and the small overnight bag that contained everything I needed for my first night at Sunshine Manor. And that's going to become very clear very quickly. As I reached the door, Ashley appeared from upstairs carrying a hastily packed suitcase. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked, her voice small and frightened. "I hear your mother's house has a finished basement," I suggested gently. I'm sure she'd be happy to help her daughter in a time of need. After all, that's what family is for. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Ashley's mother lived in a modest ranch house with exactly one spare room, which doubled as her sewing room and home office. Ashley, who had found my quiet presence in a 5-bedroom house unbearably intrusive, was about to discover what cramped living conditions actually felt like. "This isn't over," Ashley said, though she sounded more defeated than defiant. "Yes, it is," I replied. "But that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Sometimes endings are just beginnings wearing different clothes." I walked out to my car, where the movers were securing the last of my belongings in their truck. Behind me, I could hear David and Ashley beginning what sounded like it was going to be a very long, very difficult conversation about their immediate future. But that conversation was no longer my responsibility. For the first time in over a year, their problems belonged to them alone. As I drove away from the house that had been my prison disguised as a home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Complete control over my own destiny, and it felt absolutely wonderful. Sunshine Manor turned out to be everything the brochure promised and more. My 1-bedroom apartment had a view of the landscaped gardens, a kitchenette perfect for someone who no longer wanted to cook large meals, and most importantly, a door that only I had the key to. I was unpacking my books when my phone rang Tuesday afternoon. "Margaret Williams, this is Detective Rodriguez from the county sheriff's office. I'm calling about a complaint filed against you regarding property fraud." I set down my copy of Pride and Prejudice and sat in my new recliner. "I'm sorry, Detective, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. What kind of complaint?" "Your daughter-in-law, Ashley Williams, claims you illegally sold a house that belonged to her and her husband without their knowledge or consent." "I see." I looked out my window at an elderly man feeding ducks in the small pond. Such a peaceful life this could be. "Detective, do you have a copy of the property deed available?" "I do, ma'am. That's actually why I'm calling. The deed clearly shows you as the legal owner, but Mrs. Ashley Williams insists there must be some kind of fraud or forgery involved. She's quite adamant." I could only imagine Ashley's performance at the sheriff's office. "Detective Rodriguez, I've lived in that house for 13 months since my husband's death. My son and daughter-in-law were aware of the ownership situation, but there may have been some confusion about inheritance versus current ownership. Could you come in tomorrow to provide a statement, just to clear this up officially?" "Of course. What time works best for you?" The next morning, I drove to the sheriff's office in my late-model sedan, the one Frank had insisted we buy because it had excellent safety ratings. I dressed carefully in my navy blue suit and pearls, the outfit I used to wear to Frank's business dinners when I needed to look respectable and unintimidating. Detective Rodriguez turned out to be a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who dealt with family disputes regularly. "Mrs. Williams, thank you for coming in. I have to say, this is an unusual situation." "How so?" "Well, most property disputes involve people trying to keep houses they don't own. This is the first time I've had someone accused of illegally selling their own property." I smiled. I imagine Ashley made quite an impression. She did indeed. She also brought some interesting documentation with her. Detective Rodriguez pulled out a folder. "Did you sign a document last year giving your son power of attorney over your finances?" My blood went cold. "Absolutely not. She has paperwork that suggests otherwise. A notarized power of attorney dated 3 months after your husband's death, giving David Williams full authority over your financial decisions." I stared at the document she slid across her desk. It was my signature, or at least a very good forgery of it. The notary stamp looked official, but I had never, ever signed such a document. "Detective Rodriguez, I've never seen this paperwork before in my life. Are you certain? People sometimes forget documents they sign during periods of grief." "I'm certain." I studied the signature more carefully. "Detective, may I see a magnifying glass?" She provided one, and I examined the signature under magnification. This is very good, but it's not my signature. Look at the W in Williams. I have a distinctive way of writing that letter. It looks more like two V's connected. This signature doesn't have that characteristic. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward with interest. You're saying this is forged? I'm saying I never signed this document, and if Ashley is using it to claim I didn't have the right to sell my own house, then someone has committed fraud. I sat back in my chair. Detective, may I ask you something? Of course. Did Ashley happen to mention how she planned to support David's ownership claim? Because if she believes this power of attorney was legitimate, she must have known about it when they demanded I pay rent or move out. Actually, she claims they never demanded you pay rent. She says the conversation Friday night was about you voluntarily contributing to household expenses and that you misunderstood their intentions. I laughed. A sound without humor. Detective, I'm 68 years old, not senile. I know the difference between a request for contribution and an ultimatum. She also claims you've been showing signs of memory issues and confusion. Have I seemed confused to you during this conversation? Detective Rodriguez smiled slightly. No, ma'am, you haven't. Detective, may I make a suggestion? If Ashley has a forged power of attorney document, that's evidence of felony fraud. If she doesn't actually have such a document and is lying about its existence, that's filing a false police report. Either way, it seems like Ashley has bigger problems than who owns my house. You're absolutely right. Detective Rodriguez made some notes in her file. Mrs. Williams, would you be willing to provide handwriting samples for comparison? Absolutely. An hour later, I'd provided multiple handwriting samples and a detailed statement about Friday night's conversation. Detective Rodriguez had also called the notary, whose stamp appeared on the fake power of attorney document. The notary had no record of any document signed by Margaret Williams on that date. Mrs. Williams, Detective Rodriguez said, as I prepared to leave, it appears your daughter-in-law may have created fraudulent documents to try to claim ownership of your house. What happens now? Now I investigate whether Ashley Williams committed forgery and fraud. And I recommend you contact your attorney about protecting your other assets. As I drove back to Sunshine Manor, my phone rang. Mom? David's voice was strained. Detective Rodriguez called me. She says Ashley might have forged some documents? It appears so. But that's impossible. Ashley wouldn't do something like that. David, your wife tried to convince the police that I illegally sold my own house. She presented forged documents claiming you had power of attorney over my finances. What part of this seems impossible to you? Silence on the other end of the line. Mom, I swear to you, I never knew about any power of attorney document. I never asked Ashley to create anything like that. I believe you, I said, and I did. David was many things, but he wasn't a criminal. But your wife clearly had plans for my property that went far beyond charging me rent. What are you saying? I'm saying Ashley's been planning this for a while. The sudden demand for rent, the hostile treatment, calling me names. It was all designed to force me out so you could claim ownership of the house. The only problem was, she didn't realize I actually owned it legally. That's conspiracy. Yes, David, it is. When I hung up, I sat in my new living room and tried to process what I'd learned. Ashley hadn't just been cruel on Friday night. She'd been implementing a plan to steal my house, complete with forged legal documents. The question was, what other plans had she made? And what other forged documents might exist? I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Margaret, how are you settling in at Sunshine Manor? Very well, thank you. But James, I think we need to review all of my legal documents immediately. All of them. Is there a problem? I looked out at the peaceful garden where residents were gathering for afternoon tea, their lives blissfully uncomplicated by scheming relatives and forged paperwork. James, I think my daughter-in-law has been busier than any of us realized. And I have a feeling Friday night's drama was just the beginning. James Morrison had been my attorney for 15 years, handling everything from Frank's will to my insurance claims, and I'd never seen him look as grim as he did Thursday morning when I arrived at his office. Margaret, sit down. We need to talk. He opened a thick file folder that definitely hadn't existed when I'd called him yesterday. After our conversation, I did some preliminary checking. I called the bank, the insurance company, Social Security Administration, anyone who might have records of documents filed in your name. He pulled out a stack of papers. What I found is disturbing. How disturbing? Someone has been very busy with your identity. He spread the documents across his desk. Margaret, according to these records, you've been declared mentally incompetent by a court in the next county. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? 3 months ago, a petition was filed claiming you were suffering from dementia and could no longer manage your affairs. A court-appointed guardian was assigned to oversee your finances. James looked up from the papers. That guardian is listed as Ashley Williams. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. Official court letterhead, a judge's signature, legal language declaring me mentally unfit. James, I've never been to court. No one ever served me with papers about any hearing. I know. That's what makes this criminal fraud instead of just civil fraud. He pulled out another document. Look at this one. A medical assessment claiming you've been diagnosed with severe dementia and require full-time care. I read the doctor's signature at the bottom. Dr. Richard Hoffman, a name I'd never heard before. I don't know this doctor. I've never been examined for dementia. Because this Dr. Hoffman doesn't exist. I checked with the medical board. No licensed physician by that name in the state. The scope of Ashley's deception was becoming clear, and it was breathtaking in its audacity. So according to these documents, you're mentally incompetent, under legal guardianship, and all your financial decisions must be approved by Ashley Williams, including the sale of your house. But I sold the house. The sale went through. Because you sold it in a different county, where these fraudulent documents weren't on file yet. Ashley was probably planning to use them to stop the sale, but your quick timeline beat her to it. I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb the magnitude of what Ashley had attempted. She was going to have me declared incompetent so she could control my money. More than that, look at this. James handed me another document. A proposed care plan recommending you be placed in a long-term memory care facility at a cost of $8,000 a month. $8,000? I did the quick math. That would have consumed my entire inheritance within 5 years. Exactly. After which I assume you would have been moved to a much less expensive facility while Ashley and David continued living in your house, managing your remaining assets. The coffee I'd drunk that morning threatened to come back up. James, are you saying Ashley was planning to steal everything Frank left me? I'm saying Ashley created an elaborate fraud scheme designed to give her legal control over your money while making it look like she was taking care of you. His expression was dark. This is elder abuse, Margaret. The kind that destroys families and bankrupts vulnerable people. But I'm not vulnerable. You are in the eyes of the law based on these forged documents. If Ashley had succeeded in getting these filed in your home county, you could have been forcibly committed to memory care while she emptied your bank accounts legally. I thought about Friday night's dinner, Ashley's demands, the calculated cruelty of calling me an old hag in front of my son. It hadn't been an emotional outburst. It had been a strategy to create evidence of family conflict that could be used to justify removing me from my home. What about David? Did he know? James pulled out one more document. Power of attorney paperwork, giving David control over your finances if anything happens to Ashley. Dated 2 weeks ago. So, David was Ashley's backup plan. It appears so. Though I notice his signature on this document looks different from the signature on other papers in your file. I think Ashley may have forged his signature too. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. Mom, can we meet? I need to tell you something important. I showed the message to James. What do you think he wants to tell me? Maybe he figured out what his wife was doing. Maybe he found copies of these documents. Or maybe Ashley told him, and he's trying to decide which side of this fraud case he wants to be on. I stared at David's message, remembering the boy who used to come running to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings, trusting that Mom would make everything better. When had that trust gotten so complicated? James, what's our next step legally? First, we file complaints with the district attorney in both counties. This is criminal fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Second, we notify all your financial institutions about the fraudulent documents and make sure your assets are protected. Third, we consider a civil lawsuit for damages. Damages? Emotional distress, legal fees, the cost of protecting your identity and credit. Ashley's actions have caused real harm, even though they didn't succeed. I looked out James's window at the courthouse across the street, where Ashley had apparently convinced a judge that I was mentally incompetent without me even knowing a hearing was taking place. "I want to file charges," I said quietly. "All of them. Are you sure? This will be very public, very difficult for your family. Ashley made it difficult for my family when she decided to steal from me. I'm just making sure there are consequences for that choice." James nodded and reached for his phone. "I'll call Detective Rodriguez and set up a meeting. And Margaret, you should call David back. If he knows something about Ashley's plans, he needs to decide whether he's going to help the investigation or obstruct it." As I drove back to Sunshine Manor, I tried to imagine David's reaction when he learned the full scope of what his wife had done. Would he be shocked? Angry? Or would he try to minimize it, make excuses, find some way to blame me for forcing Ashley to desperate measures? I supposed I was about to find out which one of us he loved more, his manipulative wife or his supposedly incompetent mother. My phone rang as I pulled into Sunshine Manor's parking lot. "Mom, I really need to see you. Can I come over?" "Of course. I'm in apartment 314. I'll be there in an hour. And Mom, I'm sorry. About everything. But especially about what I found in Ashley's desk." So David had discovered Ashley's secret paperwork. The question was, how long had he known, and what was he planning to do about it? I had a feeling I was about to get answers to questions I'd been afraid to ask. David arrived at my apartment carrying a manila envelope and wearing the expression of a man who'd recently watched his entire life collapse. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mom." He hugged me awkwardly, smelling faintly of coffee and desperation. "I need to show you something." I led him to my small dining area, where afternoon light streamed through windows overlooking the garden. Such a contrast to the chaos he was bringing into my peaceful new world. "David, before you say anything, I need you to know that I've already been to see James Morrison and Detective Rodriguez." His face went pale. "About the forged power of attorney?" "About all of it. The fake mental incompetency ruling, the fraudulent medical records, the guardian paperwork. David, did you know Ashley was planning to have me committed to memory care?" He sank into my new dining chair like a man carrying the weight of the world. "I found the files yesterday morning while she was at her mother's house. Everything was in a locked drawer in her desk. Court documents, fake medical records, even a brochure for that memory care place." "How long have you known?" "Since yesterday. I confronted her yesterday afternoon when she got home." David opened the envelope he'd brought and pulled out photocopies of documents I was becoming unfortunately familiar with. "She tried to tell me it was all backup planning in case you really did develop dementia someday." "And you believed her?" "For about 5 minutes, until I found this." He handed me a document I hadn't seen before, a detailed timeline in Ashley's handwriting outlining her plan month by month. March. Begin documenting M's memory issues and confusion. April. Establish medical records with cooperative doctor. May. File court petition for guardianship. June. Complete legal transfer of assets. July. Move M to memory care facility. Below that, in the same handwriting, estimated timeline for full control. 4 months. Estimated inheritance protection, $800K plus house equity. I read the timeline twice, each word hitting me like a physical blow. This hadn't been a spontaneous reaction to family stress. Ashley had been systematically planning to steal my life. David, she wasn't just going to take my money. She was going to bury me alive in a memory care facility while convincing everyone I was too far gone to protest. "I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, I swear to you I had no idea. I thought we were just having normal family discussions about living arrangements. What about the power of attorney document with your signature?" "Forged. I've never signed anything like that in my life." He pulled out another paper. "I took this to a handwriting expert yesterday afternoon. She confirmed that Ashley forged both our signatures." I studied my son's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine devastation. "David, why are you showing me this instead of hiding it to protect Ashley?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the garden where several residents were playing chess at outdoor tables. "Because when I confronted her with the evidence, she didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look sorry." He met my eyes. "She looked angry that I'd found out." "What did she say?" She said I was being naive, that you were going to be a financial burden for the rest of your life if we didn't take control of the situation. She said she was protecting our children's future by securing your assets before you wasted them on unnecessary luxuries. David's voice cracked. Mom, she'd been spending beyond our means for months. Credit cards, expensive dinners, designer clothes. When she hinted about needing money last Christmas, and you suggested budgeting instead, she became obsessed with the idea that you were hoarding wealth while we struggled. Unnecessary luxuries, like living independently and maintaining my dignity. That's when I realized who I'd married. David's voice broke slightly. Mom, she actually said it would be easier for everyone if you just accepted that you belonged in memory care. That fighting, it was selfish. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Ashley hadn't just been planning financial fraud. She'd been planning to gaslight me into believing I actually needed institutional care. What else did she say? She said you selling the house proved you were making irrational decisions and that a competent guardian would have prevented it. She said the court documents were just formalizing what everyone could already see about your mental state. Everyone could see? I asked her what she meant by that. She said she'd been documenting your episodes for months. Conversations where you seemed confused, times when you forgot things, instances of poor judgment. I felt my stomach drop. David, what episodes? I haven't had any episodes. I know that now, but Ashley had notebooks full of detailed entries. Dates, times, witnesses. It all looked very official. All fabricated. But convincing enough that a judge signed off on the incompetency ruling without requiring you to be present for evaluation. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at elderly residents who were living their lives with dignity and independence. People who might be slower than they once were, who might need help with certain tasks, but who were still fully human beings deserving of respect. David, Ashley wasn't just planning to steal my money. She was planning to steal my personhood. I know. And you're sure you never suspected anything? He joined me at the window. I suspected Ashley resented having you live with us. I suspected she wanted more privacy and independence. But Mom, I never imagined she was capable of something like this. What happens now between you and Ashley? I've already moved out. I'm staying at a hotel with the kids until I can find an apartment. David's reflection in the window looked older than he had just a week ago. I can't be married to someone who would do this to you. And Ashley's reaction to that decision? She says I'm choosing you over my own family. She says I'm destroying our children's lives for the sake of an old woman who doesn't have many years left anyway. The casual cruelty of Ashley's words shouldn't have surprised me anymore. But they still stung. I'm sorry, David. I know this isn't easy. Don't you dare apologize for this, he said firmly. This isn't your fault. This is what happens when someone reveals who they really are underneath all the charm and manipulation. My phone rang. Detective Rodriguez. Mrs. Williams? We've made an arrest in your case. Ashley Williams is being charged with elder fraud, identity theft, and filing false court documents. I looked at David, whose expression had shifted from devastation to something that looked almost like relief. Thank you, Detective. What happens next? Next, she faces the consequences of deciding that your mother's life was worth less than her own convenience. After I hung up, David and I sat quietly for a few minutes, watching the peaceful life of Sunshine Manor continue outside my window. Mom, David said eventually, I know I can't undo what's happened, but I want you to know that I'm going to testify against Ashley if this goes to trial. That won't be easy for the children. No, it won't. But they need to learn that actions have consequences, even for people we love, especially for people we love. I reached over and squeezed my son's hand, feeling like I was finally meeting the man I'd raised him to become. And David, you're always welcome here for dinner if you'd like. I make an excellent lasagna in my little kitchenette. For the first time since Friday night, my son smiled. I'd like that very much. Outside, the sun was setting over Sunshine Manor's gardens, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and court hearings and difficult conversations with grandchildren. But tonight, I was going to cook dinner for my son in my own apartment, in my own space, on my own terms. And that felt like victory. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday, which gave me a week to prepare for what James warned would be an emotionally challenging experience. Ashley had hired a high-powered attorney who was apparently planning to argue that her actions were motivated by legitimate concern for my mental health rather than financial greed. She's going to claim you exhibit signs of dementia and that she was trying to protect you from making poor financial decisions, James explained during our Tuesday meeting. Her lawyer will probably point to the house sale as evidence of impaired judgment. Selling my house at below market value to get away from people who were abusing me shows impaired judgment? According to Ashley's narrative, yes. She's claiming the speed of the sale and your willingness to accept a lower offer prove you weren't thinking clearly. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. So Ashley creates a hostile environment designed to force me out, then uses my response to that hostility as evidence that I need her to make my decisions for me? Exactly. It's a sophisticated form of gaslighting, and it might have worked if you hadn't discovered the forged documents so quickly. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Kids want to see you. Can they visit this afternoon? I showed the message to James. What should I tell them about what's happening? Tell them the truth. Appropriate for their ages. They're going to hear about this anyway, and children handle difficult truths better than adult lies. At 3 o'clock, David arrived at Sunshine Manor with 10-year-old Emma and 7-year-old Michael. Both children looked confused and slightly scared, clearly aware that something serious was happening in their family, but not understanding what. Grandma! Emma hugged me tightly. Dad says you live here now. Do you like it? I love it, I said honestly. Would you like a tour? I showed them my apartment, the community room with its big screen television and game tables, the library where residents could check out books, and the dining room where meals were served family-style if people preferred company to solitude. It's like a hotel where only grown-ups live, Michael observed. That's a very good way to put it. As we walked back to my apartment, Emma asked the question I'd been dreading. Grandma, why are Mom and Dad getting divorced? David and I exchanged glances. We'd agreed he would handle most of the difficult questions, but Emma had addressed this one directly to me. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt other people, I said carefully. When that happens, other adults have to decide whether they can continue being married to someone who makes those kinds of choices. Did Mom hurt someone? Yes, sweetheart. She did. Did she hurt you? I sat down on the bench outside my apartment building so I could be at eye level with my granddaughter. Your mom tried to take some things that belonged to me without asking. When adults do that, it's called stealing, and it's against the law. Emma's eyes widened. Mom stole from you? She tried to. Is that why the police came to Grandma Ashley's house yesterday? Michael asked. I looked at David. Ashley's been arrested? Yesterday afternoon. I meant to call you, but the kids were upset and I've been trying to help them process everything. David sat down beside us. They saw her being handcuffed. My heart broke for both children. Whatever Ashley had done, she was still their mother, and watching a parent be arrested had to be traumatic. I'm sorry you had to see that, I told them. That must have been very scary. Is Mom going to jail? Emma's voice was very small. I don't know yet, David answered honestly. That depends on what the judge decides. Will we be able to visit her? Yes, no matter what happens, she'll still be your mother, and you'll still be able to have a relationship with her. We spent the rest of the afternoon playing board games and reading stories, trying to create some normalcy for two children whose world had been turned upside down. When David was getting ready to take them back to their temporary apartment, Emma hugged me goodbye and whispered in my ear, Grandma, I'm glad you didn't let Mom steal from you. After they left, I sat in my apartment thinking about the ripple effects of Ashley's choices. Two children were now living in a hotel with their father, dealing with the trauma of watching their mother arrested. David was facing divorce proceedings and the challenge of single parenthood. The extended family was fractured, probably permanently, and all of it could have been avoided if Ashley had simply treated me with basic respect and honesty. My phone rang at 8 o'clock that evening. Mrs. Williams, this is Linda Patterson, Ashley's attorney. I'd like to discuss a possible resolution to this situation that might be in everyone's best interest. I'm listening. My client is prepared to offer a formal apology and complete restitution for any financial losses you've incurred. In exchange, you would agree to drop the criminal charges and resolve this matter civilly. What kind of restitution? Payment for your legal fees, compensation for your distress, and a signed agreement that she will have no further contact with you or your financial affairs. I thought about Emma and Michael, about the public trial that would expose every detail of their mother's crimes to the community, about the media attention that would follow their family for years. Ms. Patterson, what does Ashley's apology actually say? She acknowledges that her actions were inappropriate and that she should have communicated her concerns about your welfare through proper legal channels. That's not an apology. That's a legal disclaimer. Mrs. Williams, my client made some poor decisions, but her underlying motivations were genuine concern for your well-being. I hung up. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. David. Mom, Ashley's lawyer called me. She says Ashley wants to work out a deal. I know. She called me too. What do you think? I walked to my window and looked out at the quiet evening life of Sunshine Manor. Residents sitting on benches, talking quietly or reading books. People living their lives with dignity, surrounded by community, free from manipulation and abuse. David. Ashley tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could steal my inheritance and lock me in a memory care facility. She forged legal documents, created fake medical records, and convinced a judge to sign orders that would have destroyed my life. I know. This wasn't a mistake or poor communication. This was a deliberate, calculated plan to erase me as a person while taking everything Frank left me. So you won't consider a plea deal? Would you? If someone had tried to steal your identity and bury you alive? David was quiet for a moment. No, I wouldn't. Then you have your answer. Thursday's preliminary hearing would determine whether Ashley's case went to trial, but regardless of what happened in court, I'd already won the only victory that mattered. I was still myself, living my own life, making my own decisions, and no amount of money or legal manipulation could ever take that away from me again. Ashley had gambled everything on the assumption that I was too old, too weak, and too dependent to fight back. She'd bet wrong. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes courtrooms feel even more somber than usual. I dressed in my navy blue suit again, the one that made me look respectable and competent. Two things Ashley's defense team would undoubtedly try to argue. I wasn't. James met me in the courthouse lobby 30 minutes before the hearing. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I'm about to watch justice work the way it's supposed to," I replied, "which feels surprisingly good." We walked through the metal detector and up 2 flights of stairs to courtroom 3B. I caught sight of Ashley sitting at the defendant's table with her attorney, wearing a cream-colored dress that made her look innocent and vulnerable. She didn't turn around when David and I entered, but I saw her shoulders tense. David had chosen to sit with me in the gallery, a decision that couldn't have been easy for him, but spoke volumes about where his loyalties ultimately lay. All rise for the Honorable Judge Martinez. The preliminary hearing lasted 2 hours and unfolded exactly as James had predicted. Ashley's attorney argued that his client was a concerned daughter-in-law who had become worried about my cognitive decline and taken steps to protect me from making financially damaging decisions. Mrs. Ashley Williams observed concerning behaviors over several months, he told the judge. Memory lapses, confusion about financial matters, and ultimately the impulsive sale of valuable property at significantly below market value. When it was the prosecution's turn, they methodically dismantled Ashley's narrative with evidence. The forged signatures on the power of attorney documents, the fake medical records signed by a non-existent doctor, the court filings in a different county designed to circumvent proper legal procedures. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, this wasn't a family member trying to help. This was a predator who identified a vulnerable target and systematically planned to steal her assets while making it look legal. The most damaging evidence came when Detective Rodriguez testified about finding Ashley's handwritten timeline in her desk. The defendant created a 4-month plan to gain control of the victim's finances and property, Rodriguez read from the document. This included falsifying medical records, forging court documents, and moving the victim to an expensive care facility that would have depleted her assets within 5 years. Judge Martinez asked to examine Ashley's timeline personally, reading it twice before looking directly at Ashley. Ms. Williams, this appears to be a premeditated plan to defraud an elderly family member. Do you have an explanation for this document? Ashley's attorney whispered something in her ear before she answered. Your Honor, I was researching options for my mother-in-law's care in case she needed them in the future. The timeline was hypothetical planning. Hypothetical planning that included forged signatures and fake medical records? I made some poor judgment calls while trying to prepare for a difficult situation. Judge Martinez was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the evidence spread across his bench. Finally, he looked up. Ms. Williams, the evidence presented suggests this was not poor judgment, but deliberate elder abuse and fraud. I'm ordering you bound over for trial on all charges. Ashley's face crumpled, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she looked genuinely remorseful. But I suspected her tears were more about getting caught than about the harm she'd tried to cause. As we filed out of the courtroom, Ashley's attorney approached James. My client would still be interested in discussing a plea agreement. What kind of plea? James asked. Guilty to a lesser charge, restitution, probation, and community service. No jail time? We'd prefer to avoid incarceration? Given that Ms. Williams is a mother of 2 young children, I thought about Emma and Michael, about how confusing this must be for them, about how Ashley's choices had created chaos in their lives through no fault of their own. What would she plead guilty to? I asked. Fraud in the 3rd degree, a felony, but with the possibility of probation for a first-time offender. James looked at me questioningly. It's your decision, Margaret. I considered the offer. Ashley would have a felony conviction on her record, which would follow her for the rest of her life. She'd pay restitution and presumably receive several years of probation. But she'd be home with her children instead of in prison. What about the restitution amount? Full compensation for your legal fees, plus damages for emotional distress. We're thinking somewhere around $50,000. I almost laughed. $50,000 for trying to steal $800,000 and destroy my life in the process. But then I remembered Emma's scared face, Michael's confusion, David's exhaustion from trying to hold his family together while his world fell apart. I'll consider it, I said finally, but I have conditions. What kind of conditions? Full admission of guilt in open court, no blaming me for forcing her to desperate measures, no claiming she was protecting me from my own poor judgment, and a formal apology that acknowledges the harm she intended to cause. Ashley's attorney looked uncertain. I'll discuss it with my client. As we walked out of the courthouse, David fell into step beside me. What are you thinking about the plea deal? He asked. I'm thinking about your children, I said honestly. They've already seen enough trauma. But David, I won't accept anything less than full acknowledgement of what Ashley planned to do. No minimizing, no excuses, no shifting blame. That's fair. We reached the courthouse steps where a light rain was still falling. David had parked next to James's car, and we stood under the covered entrance while James retrieved some paperwork from his vehicle. Mom, David said quietly, I want you to know that regardless of what happens with the plea deal, I'm filing for divorce. I can't stay married to someone who would do this to you. I'm sorry it's come to that. I'm not. You were right when you said some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. Ashley burned this one when she decided you were disposable. James returned with a folder of documents. Margaret, I need your signature on a few forms related to the civil restitution claim. As I signed the papers, I thought about how much my life had changed since the previous Friday. A week ago, I'd been living in my son's house, trying to be grateful for a space that never felt like home, walking on eggshells around a daughter-in-law who saw me as a burden. Now I was living independently, surrounded by people who chose to be there, free from manipulation and abuse. I had my own space, my own schedule, my own decisions to make. Ashley had tried to take all of that away from me, believing that an elderly woman had no right to autonomy or dignity. She'd been wrong about my capacity to fight back, wrong about my son's willingness to protect me, and wrong about her ability to manipulate the legal system. Most importantly, she'd been wrong about my value as a human being. James, I said, handing back the signed forms, if Ashley agrees to the plea deal with my conditions, I'll accept it. But if she tries to minimize what she did or blame me for her choices, we go to trial. Understood. As I drove back to Sunshine Manor, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete confidence in my own judgment. Ashley had tried to convince me that I couldn't manage my own affairs, that I needed someone else to make decisions for me, that my age made me incompetent and vulnerable. She'd been wrong about all of it. I was 70 years old, and I was just getting started. The call came Friday morning while I was having breakfast in Sunshine Manor's dining room with my new friend Eleanor, a retired teacher who'd moved in last month after her own family drama involving financial manipulation. "Mrs. Williams, this is Linda Patterson, Ashley's attorney. My client has agreed to your conditions for the plea agreement." I set down my coffee cup and moved to a quieter corner of the dining room. All of them? Full admission of guilt, formal apology acknowledging intended harm, and acceptance of all financial responsibility. She'll enter the plea Monday morning at 9. After I hung up, Eleanor raised her eyebrows. "Good news? The woman who tried to steal my life has agreed to admit what she did in open court and pay the consequences. Justice served, then?" I thought about Emma and Michael, about David starting over as a single father, about the ripple effects that would continue for years. "Justice served," I agreed, though I'm not sure anyone really wins when families implode like this. Monday morning brought unexpected sunshine, the kind of crisp October day that makes everything seem possible. I arrived at the courthouse early, wanting to be settled before Ashley's plea hearing began. David was already there, sitting in the same seat he'd occupied during the preliminary hearing. He'd brought the children with him, which surprised me until I remembered that their school had teacher development days this week. "I thought they should be here," he explained when I sat down beside him. "They need to see that actions have consequences, even for people we love." Emma and Michael sat quietly between David and me, clearly sensing the solemnity of the occasion, even if they didn't fully understand the legal proceedings. At exactly 9 o'clock, Ashley was led into the courtroom wearing handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. She'd been in county jail since failing to make bail after Thursday's hearing, a consequence her high-powered attorney apparently hadn't anticipated. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with her clothing. When she caught sight of Emma and Michael in the gallery, her composure finally cracked completely. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Martinez." The plea hearing followed a formal script. Ashley stood before the judge and answered a series of questions confirming that she understood the charges against her and the consequences of pleading guilty. "Do you understand that by pleading guilty to elder fraud in the first degree, you will be convicted of a Class C felony?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you understand that this conviction carries a possible sentence of up to 5 years in prison?" "Yes, Your Honor." "How do you plead to the charge of elder fraud in the first degree?" Ashley's voice was barely audible. "Guilty." "How do you plead to the charge of identity theft in the second degree?" "Guilty." "How do you plead to the charge of filing false court documents?" "Guilty." Judge Martinez reviewed the plea agreement, including the restitution terms and my requirement for a formal apology. "Ms. Williams, as part of this agreement, you've agreed to make a statement acknowledging the harm you intended to cause your mother-in-law. Are you prepared to make that statement now?" Ashley's attorney whispered something in her ear, but she shook her head and stepped forward. "Your Honor, I plan to steal my mother-in-law's money and property by having her declared mentally incompetent when I knew she wasn't. I forged legal documents, created fake medical records, and tried to convince a court that she needed to be placed in a care facility against her will." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I did this because I wanted control of her inheritance, not because I was concerned about her welfare. I tried to destroy her independence and dignity for my own financial benefit." Ashley turned to face me directly. "Margaret, I tried to steal your life from you because I thought you were too old and weak to stop me. I was wrong about your strength, and I was wrong to treat you as if your age made you less valuable as a person. I'm sorry for the harm I intended to cause, and I understand why you can never forgive me." The courtroom was silent, except for the soft sound of Emma crying beside me. I reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. Judge Martinez imposed Ashley's sentence: 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service at a senior center, complete restitution to me, and permanent prohibition from any involvement in my financial affairs. "Ms. Williams," the judge said before dismissing her, "elder abuse is one of the most despicable crimes that comes before this court. You targeted a vulnerable family member and planned to systematically destroy her autonomy and dignity for your own gain. The only thing that saved you from prison was your victim's mercy and your willingness to take full responsibility for your actions." As Ashley was led away to be processed for release on probation, she looked back at her children one more time. Emma was sobbing openly now, and Michael had buried his face against David's shoulder. Outside the courthouse, David tried to comfort both children while I stood quietly nearby, unsure of my role in this moment. "Why did Mom try to hurt Grandma?" Emma asked through her tears. David knelt down to be at her eye level. "Sometimes adults make very bad choices because they want things that don't belong to them. When that happens, other adults have to step in to stop them. But why didn't she just ask for help if she needed money?" Out of the mouths of babes. Emma had identified the central question that had puzzled me throughout this ordeal. If Ashley and David were struggling financially, why hadn't they simply talked to me about it? I would have been happy to help with reasonable requests. "That's a very good question," I told Emma. "And I think the answer is that your mom didn't want help. She wanted control. What's the difference? Help means asking someone to support you through difficult times. Control means taking away someone else's right to make their own decisions." As we walked to our cars, David fell into step beside me. "Mom, I know the kids are going to need therapy to process all this. Would you be willing to participate in some family sessions? Not with Ashley, but to help Emma and Michael understand what happened and maintain their relationship with you?" "Of course." "And Mom? Thank you for accepting the plea deal. I know you could have sent her to prison." I looked back at the courthouse where Ashley's crimes had finally been acknowledged and punished, then forward to the peaceful life waiting for me at Sunshine Manor. "David, I learned something important through all of this. The best revenge isn't destroying someone else's life. It's living your own life so well that their attempts to harm you become irrelevant." That afternoon, I sat in my apartment reading a book while autumn sunlight streamed through my windows. Tomorrow, I would start volunteering in the children's reading program at the local library. Next week, I had a dinner date with Eleanor and some of her friends. Next month, I was planning to visit my sister in Colorado for the first time in years. My life was full of possibilities that had nothing to do with Ashley's schemes or David's guilt or anyone else's expectations of how a 70-year-old widow should behave. I was finally free to be exactly who I wanted to be, and that, I thought as I turned the page of my book, was worth more than any inheritance Ashley could have stolen. 3 months later, I was arranging flowers in Sunshine Manor's lobby when David arrived for our weekly lunch date, carrying what looked like official paperwork and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "Good news or complicated news?" I asked, setting down my pruning shears. "Both, actually." He held up the papers. "Ashley's divorce attorney just delivered the final settlement agreement. It's over." We walked to the dining room and found our usual table by the window overlooking the gardens, where several residents were enjoying the mild February afternoon. "What are the terms?" I asked after we'd ordered our meals. "Joint custody of the kids, child support based on Ashley's new job at the call center, and division of assets." David paused. "Mom, there's something else. Something I need to tell you about the house sale." I felt a flutter of concern. "What about it?" "I've been in touch with the family who bought it, the Johnsons. They're wonderful people, retired military, grandparents, very kind, and they've made an offer I wanted to discuss with you." "What kind of offer?" David pulled out another document. "They want to sell it back to you, at the exact price you sold it for, plus improvements they've made." I stared at him. "Why would they want to do that?" "Because Mrs. Johnson's mother is moving in with them, and they've realized the house is too big for their needs now. They're downsizing to a smaller place closer to their daughter." David's eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "Mom, they said when they learned why you'd sold the house so quickly, they felt terrible about benefiting from a family crisis. I thought about the house that had been my prison disguised as a home, the place where I'd felt unwelcome and unwanted, the source of so much pain and conflict." "I don't want it back," I said quietly. David's face fell. "Oh, I thought maybe you'd want to come home." I reached across the table and took his hand. "David, this is home now. Sunshine Manor is where I belong, surrounded by people who choose to be here, living independently without being anyone's burden. But it's our family house, Dad's dream house. No, sweetheart, it was your father's gift to me, which I used exactly as he would have wanted, to protect myself when I needed protection. The house served its purpose. Our lunch arrived, and we ate quietly for a few minutes while David processed my decision. Finally, he looked up. "What should I tell the Johnsons?" "Tell them to find a family who will love that house the way Frank and I once did. Tell them to sell it to people who will fill it with laughter and joy and children's voices. I smiled. And tell them I said thank you for being the kind of people who would make such a generous offer. Are you sure? Mom? You'd have complete control this time. No Ashley, no demands, no ultimatums. I'm sure. That house represents a chapter of my life that's finished. I'm writing new chapters now. After David left, I walked through Sunshine Manor's common areas, greeting friends and neighbors, stopping to watch a competitive bridge game in the card room, listening to Mr. Peterson practice piano in the music room. This was my community now. People who understood that aging didn't mean becoming invisible or irrelevant. People who supported each other without keeping score, who offered help without expecting control in return. That evening, I was reading in my apartment when someone knocked on my door. Emma stood in the hallway holding a handmade card and looking slightly nervous. "Hi, Grandma. Dad said I could visit if it was okay with you." "It's always okay with me, sweetheart. Come in." She handed me the card, which she decorated with flowers and glitter. Inside, in her careful 9-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for teaching me that being strong doesn't mean being mean." Emma, what a beautiful card. Thank you. I made one for Mom too, but it says something different. What does it say? It says, "I love her, but I don't like what she did, and I hope she learns to be sorry for real." Not just sorry she got caught. I hugged my granddaughter, marveling at her wisdom and clarity. That's a very grown-up thing to understand. Dad says you're going to help us in therapy to talk about everything that happened. If you want me to, yes. I want you to. Because I want to understand why grown-ups sometimes do terrible things to people they're supposed to love. That's a very important question. And I think working together, we'll find some answers. After Emma left with David, I stood on my small balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. 6 months ago, I'd been living a life defined by other people's expectations, accommodating everyone else's needs while ignoring my own. Tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. Independent, respected, surrounded by community, but beholden to no one. I had new friendships, new interests, new routines that pleased no one but me. Ashley had tried to steal my autonomy, my dignity, and my future. Instead, her actions had forced me to reclaim all three. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Dinner tomorrow at 6? Martha's making her famous lasagna." I texted back, "Wouldn't miss it." This was what happiness looked like at 70. Small pleasures freely chosen, relationships based on mutual respect, and the profound peace that comes from never having to apologize for taking up space in your own life. Ashley had called me an old hag and demanded that I pay rent or get out. Well, I'd gotten out all right. I'd gotten out of a life that was making me smaller every day and into a life that celebrated exactly who I was. And I'd never been happier to prove someone wrong in my entire life. The next morning, while Ashley was starting her community service at Riverside Senior Center across town, where she would spend the next 500 hours learning to treat elderly people with the respect she'd never shown me, I was having breakfast with friends, planning my day according to my own preferences, living my life on my own terms. Justice, I thought, as I watched the sunrise through my dining room window, sometimes looks less like revenge and more like freedom. And freedom, it turned out, was the sweetest victory of all. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.